Or
They're always 40 minutes.
They're always 40 for middle school.
Yes.
All classes.
Yes. The benefit of this class is that reading and writing are separated. Technically, we don't separate them the way we handle them in the curriculum, but I already taught these kids this morning with their actual teacher.
Okay.
So I actually get them for 80 minutes for literacy, but science, social studies, science, math, hi, come on in, are 40 minutes apiece.
Okay.
Hello, welcome back.
I thought they were spiders.
You know what? I guess they don't really look like spiders. They look like ghosts.
Is it aiming at all of us?
Yep, it's all of us. We're superstars.
No, how many cameras are in this thing?
One.
One? And aiming at everyone at the table? Whoa.
It's all good. I think yours is turned off. I do. I'm fancy. I'm hot stuff. Hello.
Cameras.
We're all going to be famous for good reasons. Did anybody happen to see David between first block and now, Christiana? Please, go ahead, sweetie. Yes. Yep, go ahead. If you want to go, run now. So nobody's seen David?
No.
Okay. What, yeah? Yes, David? Yes. All right. So we'll wait for them to come back. While we're waiting for them to come back, let's all get settled. You should have on each of your desks a blue pen, a red pen, a highlighter, your copy of I Hear America Singing with your annotations, and a rubric that I put on your desk while you were gone. All right, and so what I'll do is as soon as your classmates come back, 3 of them just ran to the restroom, as soon as they come back, we'll get started. So if you want to take this opportunity, just take a quick look around. Notice that there are cameras. It's no big deal. Take a deep breath, get yourself settled, feel good, and then we'll get started. Bethel Troetti. I am. It's okay. Miss Chapman's in big trouble. She interrupted. All right. What we'll do is, how about we'll get started, and then as whoever else is coming in comes in. Okay, so we have been talking about annotating and how well you're all doing with your annotations, keeping track of your thinking. And we talked about that when we're trying to get to really understand a text or a concept that a text brings forward, our annotations are important because they do help us keep track of our thinking, but it's not enough for us to stop there. We kind of need to take that to another place. So our objectives for this class that will actually move then into tomorrow and the rest of the week, and if you just want to read these in your head along while I read them out loud, our learning objectives for today. I will understand attributes of interesting critical questions in order to create my own discussion questions. And I will analyze questions and answer or discuss them to develop a deeper understanding of text. In this case, today, it's I Hear America Singing. Does anybody have any questions about any of the language in the objectives or what they mean? Okay, we started to talk a little bit about questioning, so we're really going to continue that and dig deeper into that way to really understand text deeply. Okay. So as I said, and as we talked about earlier, annotations are important. when we're trying to keep track of our thinking on a text. As a matter of fact, I'm going to share this with you in a minute. These are my annotations on I Hear America Singing. But sometimes when I'm thinking about a text, I have to ask some basic or literal questions. Things like who, what, when, where, because there's just something about the text I just don't get. But the most interesting questions that I ask, and the questions that I want to discuss with others to really get to understand a text more, or a concept or a theory or something that the text is bringing forth, when I want to understand that more, there are certain types of questions I ask. And this is not new when I talk about these attributes to the types of questions I ask, but I did put together the attributes of critical, interesting questions all in one place so that we can use these criteria or these expectations to analyze questions and then use these criteria or these expectations to write our own really good discussion questions. So if you take a look on your desk, you'll see you have a copy of a questioning rubric that I also have up on the projector. You also have on your desk a red pen, a blue pen, and a highlighter. You're going to need all three of those. So if you could please pick up the red pen first. So interesting, critical, deep thinking questions that I want to ask about text. The first thing, the first quality or attribute about those types of questions are that they're text specific. So with your red pen, let's label, circle, color, doodle, decorate, however you want to indicate the text, but we're going to label text specific with a red pen. That's our first attribute. I'm just going to make this red on mine. Okay, and you know what, again, this is review. When we talk about questions being text specific, I'm reading the language right off the rubric. They require direct references to the text to support your response. And you're used to this. When you give an interpretation or when you're saying something about a poem, a short story, a graph, you have to support what you're saying about it with what the author actually wrote. So what does that look like in a question? If you look at the advanced column, the question requires multiple direct specific uses of words, phrases, sentences, or passages from the text to support your response. I know that some of you do this really well because of some of the questions you started to ask about I Hear America Singing when we were talking about it Monday. Yesterday was a snow day, Monday. So we have a general sense of what this is. We want to make sure that as we start to dig into other texts that we consider this, that the question is not just something tangentially related to the text, but actually based on the poem itself, say. The second attribute that we're looking for about really interesting, good discussion questions, and for this you need your blue pen. We're going to label the second attribute in blue. It's that questions are higher order. And we may not have used this specific terminology before, but you know what we're talking about when we talk about higher order. These types of questions, and again, I'm reading right off the rubric. You can follow along with me in the second box. They require analysis, synthesis, or evaluation. Those are big, fancy, multisyllabic words. What does that mean? It means that our thinking has to go beyond just figuring out the who is this about, what are they doing, when did this happen, and where does it happen. It's really trying to figure out the bigger ideas and concepts of the text. And some ways that we know that our questions are higher order, if you take a look at that first, the advanced column next to higher order, questions may start with why or how. You're used to asking those types of questions. Questions require the reader to think about multiple pieces of information and or to make informed judgments about the text, the topic. The question requires thinking that includes and extends beyond the text. Remember, we want it to be text specific in that when I ask a question about I Hear America Singing, it's based on that. But this morning we mentioned that the poem being about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? We could talk about how other things also deal with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Do you remember the document we said that comes from? Anybody? From maybe social studies or from?
The Constitution.
You're so close. The Constitution is based on that whole premise. You're right there. It's a seminal U.S. document. Judah?
The Declaration.
The Declaration of Independence. We all have inalienable rights that we should be able to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When we're talking about I Hear America Singing, we're going to ask really good questions about how that concept is shown in the poem. But then we can also take our analysis of the poem, connect it to other places we see life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as long as we remember to bring it back to what Whitman is saying about it. Either compare it, contrast it to what Whitman's saying, or support it with what he has here, as there. And frequently, we know that questions are higher order because they usually connect to a piece of text, main message, theme, central idea. It doesn't always have to, but a lot of times it does. And I'm going to talk about that in a second when I show you some questions that I wrote. And then the last component or attribute of the really interesting, juicy discussion questions we want to be writing to lead discussions on our own are that they're open-ended, which means that there's not just one answer. Because how boring would a conversation be if I turned to Connor and I asked him a question, Connor, is it yes or is it no?
Yes.
Conversation over. That's not a conversation. That's when you need an answer to, do you want to go to the movies tonight? Or, something very specific that's not going to lead to a lot of back and forth discussion. We want our questions to be open-ended. And for this, I want you to highlight this. I had pink highlighters for everybody. So question in pink, questions are open-ended. There are multiple responses, possibilities rooted in text. If you could highlight it, I'll highlight it on my document. There we go. Whoa, that's bright. Okay? So, and again, what that means is that there's more than just one answer, so that there actually can be some interesting academic conversation around a text, a concept, multiple texts. We just started this unit, so we've only read I Hear America Singing, but as part of your homework for tonight, you're reading another poem, and then over the course of the next few weeks, actually month and a half, you'll be reading lots of different texts that are going to help you answer the unit's essential question. And the more we discuss these with questions that are text-specific, higher order, and open-ended, the more we're going to start to pull information from multiple texts, maybe not just even one text. I know this is a lot. It's also review. It just all happens to be in one place so that we could use this as a guideline. Before we break into our next activity in groups, does anybody have any burning questions about questions right now, or about the rubric itself? Okay, then to give us some practice really understanding the expectations and to help us break down this rubric a little bit, I have for you some questions that I wrote based on my annotations of I Hear America Singing. So let me give those out, and then we'll talk about what we're going to do with them. There we go. Okay, once everybody has a copy, let's talk about what we have in front of us. You've written discussion questions before for Socratic Seminar, for your literature circle groups, just for class discussion in general. So again, this is not a brand new concept. We're just really focusing on using our criteria points to refine our skill of asking questions, to get really good at leading our own group discussions. Because your teachers aren't going to follow you around through life asking you certain questions about what you read and listen to and see on TV or see in movies. You really need to be able to do that on your own. So you may have your own process that you go through for coming up with questions based on what you read. I'm going to share my process with you. If you want to use it, feel free. And if you have a different process that works for you, that's good too. So my process is that when I first read it, I hear America singing. I read through it a couple times. As I was going through, I made notes about what I was thinking. And then you'll see, I went through and I kind of looked for patterns. What were things that I noticed over and over again? Either certain types of language, literary devices, and some of the things that I noted which were the same things that you did. When I looked at your annotations, what you did the other day when you were reading it for the first time, some of you noted that he uses a lot of repetition, okay? And the types of things he repeats are the types of Americans, the jobs that they're doing, their tools and their workplaces. I also noticed that he repeated a lot of possessive language. His, hers, belongs to, apostrophe S. So I made notes about those things. On the side, you see that I made a note to myself that these are examples of repetition. I also made a note that there are possessives, which I interpreted as ownership. I also, you'll see, I went through, and a lot of the words that I noticed that Whitman uses are very positive, and we had a discussion about that in here. Things like singing, carols, which has a very holiday connotation for me, blithe, robust, party, all very positive. So I started to go through, and I made notes about the patterns that I saw. I also looked for where there might be changes or things that didn't make sense to me. Like I happened to notice, I don't know how many of you noticed this, that a whole lot of this poem is devoted to talking about men, and then females get 2 tiny little lines. I don't know if anybody noticed that. I noticed that, so I want to ask some questions around that to see why that might be. I also noticed that there's the idea of America, the whole, and then there's this breakdown of all the different individuals who make up America, the whole. So after I took note of all the different things that I noticed, the patterns that I noticed, I also looked for things that didn't make sense to me, like the word blithe. I thought I knew what it meant, but I wasn't positive, so I looked up the definition. He also has a line, each singing what belongs to him or her, and to none else. I did have a question about that as far as, well, why can't these things belong to other people? Don't we have similarities? So that was something I wanted to explore further. And then based on that, I really thought about it, and if you take a look at your other sheet, I used my annotations to come up with a few questions. Okay, so you're all looking at the questioning sheet that goes with it. Michael, you have yours? Okay, and in a minute we're going to break down into groups, and I'm going to assign you a task to break down one of the A, B, or C questions. But at the top there's an example. Do I have a volunteer to read the example at the top? Brittany?
The poet uses words like singing, carols, delicious, robust, friendly, strong, and melodious. All words with very positive connotations. How do these words reveal Whitman's tone and perspective?
Okay. So, I will tell you, I'm going to end the mystery. This is a decent question that I would expect you to come up with for conversation or academic discourse about the poem. And not only would I expect it partially because you're good and I've heard the questions you do, I've heard the questions you ask, but some of you actually came up with this question in your groups, even without my prompting. So I wanted to use it as a model for the class. What I'd like you to do right now as a group is take your red pen, your blue pen, and your pink highlighter. As a group, talk about what specifically in this question is the language that shows that it's text specific. Highlight, or not highlight, underline or circle in red, according to, we coded our rubrics. What are the parts of this that show that it is a text specific question? Then go through as a group, take your blue pen, and go through and underline or circle. What are the parts of this that show that it's higher order, that it's requiring thinking that goes just beyond who, what, when, or where in the poem? And you can use your rubric as a guideline to figure out what type of words in the question would indicate that it's higher order. And then, any guesses about what we're doing with the highlighter? Aman?
We're highlighting to see like what allows the answer to have multiple responses.
Excellent, and thank you for, you didn't even use the term open-ended, you flipped it around and used your understanding of what being open-ended means. That was nice. And then you're going to highlight the wording in the question that makes this an open-ended question. So if you want to start to think about it on your own, or if you just want to go for it as a group, and then we're going to come back together in about, I'm going to say, a minute and a half. Yes,
questions that are text
for the example. So what parts make it text-specific, higher order, and open-ended?
So when it says uses in the title, poet says he is America, the whole country sings. He says he's reputation, his race, his their work. When it says specific words, equipment used individual to convey message out of the country as a whole.
Okay, so
Okay, just hold on one second. You're still working with the example.
Yeah.
You're identifying which parts of this make it text-specific, which parts make it open-ended, and which part makes it higher order.
so for the text specific,
Well, the part that had an emotion reveal it is not perspective makes it open-ended. So we would highlight that.
Good use of the rubric to remember what it is that you're looking for.
yeah,
So,
yeah, what the poet said.
the word analysis.
I see all three colors. So do you want to explain to me what you chose and why you chose it?
So when it says that it requires that was
The last one is kind of like saying like, what do you think?
then all word questions are higher order analysis.
Okay, so there are
Evaluation, not just very
possible multiple interpretations to this question. Have you thought about what those different interpretations might be?
How do these words reveal what ends?
And then
Think about that and
Okay, they're happy, they're celebrating. Like what?
Well, like, at first I thought it was the Great Depression, that's something is over, but then the Great Depression comes later, so it could just be the
Is that a higher order
Civil War
question?
that is over.
Okay.
And then the last one would be the highlighter and
That
it's
celebration.
Okay, and you went specifically back to the text where to come up with that interpretation.
over here it says questions that start with higher. Oh, that's
Well,
yeah.
I noticed that it doesn't talk about slavery or anything, but time
the
period.
last one would
So,
be
and then I thought about how everyone was saying all these workers doing their work, and that if there was a war, that these would all be doing work, like making military stuff.
this.
And because of that, then I assumed it was after a war or during that time period.
Those are all interesting interpretations based on the language in the text. You also mentioned the time frame when it was written, which is not offered on the poem. So how did you know that? Nice job with the research. Okay. Questions about the rubric, the criteria? You're okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to come back together in just a couple of seconds. How are we doing over here?
Would you be able to argue that a word like robust wouldn't necessarily be a positive?
I don't know, would you?
Robust can be either way.
Yeah.
You could argue that it could be a negative comment. Robust can be robust.
How could it be negative?
Negative.
Well, it's like you said, it's sort of like vigorous. So it can mean going against something, or it can be described a person that's being loud or.
So when it says other these words reveal
Is there another word in the poem that would support
the word,
Lie.
how does it make him
why?
is it a reach, or is it the words exotic?
Happy, like,
Okay, so you could use that specific use of the word blithe to support that maybe robust could possibly go over the line and be too much, too strong.
So
That's
we can
interesting.
have robust articulation. It's all right.
It sounds like this group could. So you have pieces then of all of them and you can explain why? Okay. All right, let's come back together as a group. Our understandings, a lot of people had those very first, the list of singing carols blah, 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 through melodious as the text specific part. Did anybody else pick any other part of the question that was text specific? Brittany?
Oh no, that was it. That's all we had.
Okay. Any other pieces? I mean, you don't get much more specific than that. I mean, we took Walt Whitman's words and we rewrote them. How about open-ended? Having more than one possible interpretation. What did you highlight? Marty?
How do these words reveal Whitman's tone and perspective?
Okay, and why did you say that is open-ended?
Because you can't just say yes, they reveal his perspective or no. You actually have to explain your reasoning, like how does it? You can't just say yes or no.
Okay, and if we take even just that piece, the perspective piece, we had a conversation this morning where people offered lots of different possibilities for what Walt Whitman's perspective could be or might be influenced by. So just the fact that was open to so many different interpretations this morning, that helps prove that this is open-ended. And then the last piece, that it's higher order, the part that you had in blue. Aria?
How did these words reveal Whitman's tone and perspective?
And why did you say that was higher order?
Because for the higher order it says questions may start with why or how.
Okay, excellent. And I saw this in another group, the use of the rubric to help clarify the expectations. That was a good strategy. And the how. It's not just do they, yes or no, but we really need to do some thinking and explanation of that. Questions about this activity? I think based on what everybody's saying, based on what I saw, we're all in a good place. You have an index card on your desk with a letter, either A, B, or C. Based on the letter on your table, you and your group are to analyze either question A, B, or C at the bottom of the page. Do the same thing you did with the example question. Underline in red the parts that are text specific, underline in blue the parts that are higher order, and highlight in pink the parts that are open-ended. Then, because again, the same way we don't make annotations just for the sake of marking up the text, we don't ask questions just for the sake of coming up with good questions. They're meant to guide our thinking and discussion. So after your group has determined the different parts of the question, or the different attributes of the question, then I want you to actually discuss it to help us come to a better, deeper understanding of I Hear America Singing. Questions about your task? If you do have, if you need a review, the directions are on top and they're bulleted at the top. I will give you a minute to get started and then I'll come bounce around to the groups to check in.
Okay, well.
Their observations, each with his own language.
Because it's questions and it's
Two lines describing the trail of two lines that what is his review and how, so why might this be important to
like,
them?
it could be like, someone could be like,
And if you look at it, it doesn't
you know,
if you look at it, it's all the things he's saying about women are entitled that the women's a mother, the woman is doing work, the woman is
you could say that
showing the wash.
one person is here saying that because he only has like girls in it like one time and then he's saying that he has
How about more working
that's it, you know, or someone could be saying it's like
That's just
For the text specific, so why 2/3 of the vote? So the question is asking.
Does everybody agree with what Kristen's analysis?
directly convey a message about
So she said too, that she said that, why does Whitman repeat the this possessive language? She said that that could be higher order and open-ended. Why don't you take a second? I'd like somebody in the group besides Kristen to talk about how it's open-ended and somebody to talk about how it's higher order.
like again, he's proud of his country.
I'll come back.
You could tell by what like their jobs, what they work for, and singing is more like a positive thing.
Listing various workers in the
So
work,
singing is
workplace,
close
and
to
activities
I was doing
that show life, resources,
happy,
and
so
that's more and make informed judgments.
And the part with the repetition,
Well, to
it kind
say
of
listing that would probably be.
the message it conveys is how all of these people are mentioned every single one. It's singing
and it would
and it's the different kinds of people. How they're so different, but they're
That's a huge concept that you just brought forth through the use of the repetition of the positive language. I think that's a really good example of how you could analyze a literary term and connect it to the bigger ideas. I would suggest that if you're going to continue to discuss that big idea and if that helps your interpretation, you might want to make a note of that somewhere. What Ariel just said. This way you add that to your notes and your understanding, especially because eventually we're going to come back to this, compare it to some of the other literature we're reading and use it to answer the essential question. That's a key concept. Nice work.
And that's it, we have to
Yeah, I
evaluate.
think that the wife that usually put that.
Throughout the whole repetition and
I didn't highlight that part of it, but I probably should.
Can you imagine to like
It does make sense.
imagine having to have to always clean the house all the way? That would be
I don't want to shut your conversation down, but I like what it was good the way you were interacting to help build understanding. Once you've identified the components or the attributes of the question, then if you want to start actually discussing your response to it.
it had all three types of questions. I want to go in. He was born in 1892. And so,
I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about this question. Before I get to the content, did you have any questions about the attributes of the question?
Well, what if I compare the poetry to those males? Does he favor
he was living at a time.
That may be a question that you create.
The only thing
I'm just asking you my question. I think your question is a good addition too, and if we're really trying to dig into that. If you look at the layout, he portrays males and their work through those first, however many lines of the poem that is. Off the top of my head, I'm going to estimate 10. And then you get those two lines for the delicious singing of the mother, the young wife at work of the girl sewing or washing.
It'd all be like.
Is that a similar portrayal to the way he portrays the men? Is it different in any way? Is there anything that you notice about that? It's anything in general.
Well,
And it could be, you followed up with, does he favor one? I don't know, is there evidence in the poem that would suggest that he does or not? There's a reason you asked that question.
I think that's how they would be living in time. Men would be at like jobs and women would be at home.
So that would be a typical social norm of the time period. So you know that from inquiry that you did based on the time period that you did on Walt Whitman when he published this. What else are you saying?
well, he could favor the women because he's saying how it's like the woman's like compelled to it's like that spirit of the woman, whereas they're getting all dirty.
Does it say that they're getting all dirty in the poem?
You can assume because Mason chipping away all the stone stuff is get all over her, and then you could talk about all the rows of stuff.
Probably wasn't
the boatmen, some of the tar, the cracks, and stuff, and so on.
I feel like Emma, you started to talk, and Annika, you started to talk. I'm gonna let this discussion be among you, so if you have something you wanna respond, you can do that, and if you have another question or a topic related to the question that you would like to raise, that's the whole purpose of this, is to keep this discourse going. So I'm going to be quiet and let you respond.
Because the reason I think that why they're talking about the men so much in the women's schools is because the men don't place like the major roles in society wise like that, and the women did like because they didn't vote then and they didn't have the same. I'm pretty sure it was like wherever the rights weren't as equal out. They don't think they could work. Like they don't get hired.
I'd say it's more about the whole country though.
Or if they did, would they be hired as masons, boatmen, mechanics? So that the job descriptions are different. I'm impressed with the knowledge of history. Your social studies teacher will be very proud of you for your time references, your timeline. Don't tell her. You know what? I'll leave it a secret, and then you guys can surprise her in class with all you know.
Hey Judah, I was gonna say I don't think that he favors one gender over the other. I think it's just that at that time period, this was what everyone expected. He didn't know any difference to write them equal as where men get half the poem and women get half the poem. This is just what he knows to write. I think it's how he grew up.
I think he's kind of brainwashed to do this
Yeah,
over generations.
I guess it's
I'll let you continue.
that we kind of know.
Hi. How's it going over here? Excellent. I don't know if you can, but you may. Good, go for it. So let's see. You had question B. Did you have questions about the attributes? Okay.
We were talking about how we basically portrays the females and how it must be, I don't know, really the time period in which the females are more grateful population is edited.
Yeah, because Martin Luther King had been prosperity.
Was it 1800 or 1900?
It started earlier, but and we would definitely need to bust out the technology. As a matter of fact, I should probably ask you to do that. It is, the women's suffrage movement was later than this. You are correct about that. It is prior to the civil rights movement of which Martin Luther King was a part, but they're interesting topics that you bring up. And I'm interested to hear where else you went with this conversation. I'm going to leave you to continue your inquiry to find out more information based on this, but then I'd like to hear what the follow-up is about how that information affects your interpretation of Whitman's message and perspective.
1920, they got the started in 1840. So it was, I believe that he incorporated them, but it
So Martin Luther King was given the final say on what's going on.
basically,
So like it was a long process.
Martin Luther King didn't really start to have a major public influence until even later. Yes.
so he was born in 1819, died in 1892. So he was alive during this time period. He went over and then if it was earlier or later, he wouldn't have even incorporated the sentence about women. But since he knew women were fighting, he at least did this, even though it's about them just doing it.
But to expand on that, it's
They were
not.
fighting, yeah. They were
Lauren was just
What?
that if they were supposed to have, there's nothing more to that to be said or done. That's just what they know.
Don't really describe.
Okay, I have another question that I want to put into this. Malcolm, you just said, I'm going to improvise here and say that the women don't get as much airtime in the poem as the men do. But you just said that he still seemed to respect them. What I'd like to hear is your conversation about what is it in the text that makes you think that he still respects them? And again, come back to how does all of this impact his message, what we think his purpose is, what we think his perspective is about America, singing, and that life, liberty, pursuit of happiness concept.
Wait, I have no idea.
You may. Yes, you may speak. But don't forget to come back and really talk about that question. That was a great question.
It's but I think that even
How are we doing over here? Are we okay? We finished it. Done. Check. Nothing more to discuss. We're done. We get. I hear America singing. We're all over it. What'd you say?
And then they would have even incorporated a sentence about women and what they do.
Please
excuse the interruption. The following students, please come to the office at the end of this block. Sage Goddard, Jake Gorman, Niccolo Schlanger,
Interesting.
Cole Bryant, Nick Kraus, Jack Demers, Michael Noon, Dean Pallas, Jaden Cook, and Dante Van Houten. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, there are some very, very interesting conversations, thoughts, reflections, additional questions happening at each of these tables. On Friday, we are going to take some of this discussion and layer in information about the next text or analysis of the next text that we'll be reading to revisit these questions and talk about them in, gentlemen, in the broader context of how all of these smaller questions help us analyze or answer the unit's essential question. As part of that, tonight for homework, I'm going to ask you to read I-2 by Langston Hughes. The first part is to annotate it. The second part is to ask at least 3 interesting quality discussion questions for your group for tomorrow. We will be working with these. We'll use the rubric to give each other feedback and possibly revise our questions, and then we will use them as the focus of our group discussions tomorrow. So again, the homework is to read the poem, annotate as you typically do. It may be after multiple rereadings. If you look this up on YouTube, you will also find multiple readings of it if you're looking to hear it from another source. Langston Hughes himself does a reading of this that will actually be the first, if you search for this on YouTube, the first one that comes up is Langston Hughes himself, the poet, reading this. And 3 discussion questions. If you haven't already done so, please write that down, that in addition to the annotations, you want to use your annotations to come up with 3 discussion questions that we'll use as the basis of tomorrow's class. Any questions? We have about 30 seconds left. You can get yourselves organized, packed up. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you tomorrow.